All right, everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Maui Athletics podcast, where we go over all of your questions from the internet, from our Facebook group, from Instagram, from our Mighty Networks community, and shed some enlightenment on the fitness space. So, just like always, we have a large bank of questions to get to. Thankfully, you guys have put in a lot of good input here, and so let's get into it so we can get to as many as possible. First one. Are the bosu ball or stability ball good for ab work? It's funny. We make fun of things like the bosu ball and the stability ball, but I actually think that this is one of those applications that can actually make sense. I mean, things like stability ball crunches can target your abs very well. And as long as you're using these appropriately, you can certainly use them for ab work. I would think that for things that require a lot more stability, like heavy lifting, it probably doesn't make sense to use them. But for ab work, yeah, I think that they're a great addition to any kind of exercise protocol. In fact, I um, typically throughout the decades have stuck to essentially stability ball crunches and either hanging leg raises or reverse crunches on a bench. And so they've been my mainstays for decades, essentially. Beth, do you have any other input for those?
No, I also like the stability ball. I like the rollouts that we've programmed before with the arms. Those are really hard. Um, and I've done a lot of stability ball work in my days, especially back when I was doing figure, and I really liked it. And like you said, that's really the the only time that I'm going to be using a stability ball or a BOSU ball is probably for ab work.
Yeah, but they really come in handy for that. And obviously
Yeah.
you don't need them to be successful in those type of movements, but they do tend to help quite a bit.
Yeah.
Um, and so if it's something that it's an easy thing for you to invest in, I don't think that it's a bad idea. The thing that I really like about the stability ball in ab type situations is the fact that you can support your lower back. It doesn't really grind into it too badly. Um, and your upper back can essentially be off into space. And so it forces you to use the musculature that you're trying to hit to actually perform the movement. Whereas in a lot of situations when people are doing things like sit-ups, you're using a lot of either momentum or hip flexors. And I think that this can allow a lot of people who don't have full body control to take advantage of this and really kind of learn that movement. So I think that they're great under those circumstances. All right, moving on. Will a deeper squat allow more glute growth? Technically, yes. And the answer for squatting is typically go as low as your mobility will allow that is comfortable. That's how you find the right position for squatting. Over time, if you're working out under load, you're most likely going to be able to increase mobility and increase flexibility. But taking it as deep as possible is actually a good thing, not only for glute growth, but for safety. And this is kind of a strange thing for a lot of people. And I'm not saying go ass to grass if you can't handle it. What I'm saying is go as deep as you possibly can while still maintaining good mobility. The reason being there's something called the wrapping effect. And the wrapping effect is the way the musculature and the soft tissue works around the knees. And technically, the deeper that you go, the more of a wrapping effect that you have, and it tends to be protective for the knees. And so it's really funny because there have been a lot of online fitness gurus that have told people that they can't go deeper than 90 degrees on a squat. And if anybody's interested in seeing the research surrounding that, I have an entire article on the website about it. But 90 degrees is about where you get the most shearing force. And so
On the ACLs. Yep.
yeah, so if we really wanted to avoid strain on the knees, you would not squat specifically to just 90 degrees, which is funny because it's the complete opposite of the claim. But the reason that that claim is there is because it's contrary to the evidence. And if they make that claim, then, it makes them unique. And so there's a reason that that kind of took off. Whereas everybody else essentially says, hey, just squat as deep as you can. That's why people say that ass to grass thing. They're not saying you have to go ass to grass, but you try. And assuming that you can get down relatively deeply, do it if you want to. I mean, if we knew that going deep would cause knee issues, we would see major issues in every Olympic weightlifter. I mean, they all essentially can touch their butt to the back of their heels, so it doesn't happen. Um, when it comes to rest between sets, is there a time I should be waiting as I feel I go too quickly? So this is going to be different depending on essentially your rep scheme For the set, it's going to be dependent on your recovery needs and it's going to be dependent on the type of exercise done. Usually, for most exercises, you're going to be between 1 and 5 minutes. The more compound of an exercise that it is, the longer the time frame probably should be. The lower reps, which means higher weight, the longer the time that it probably should be. For the majority of your work, you're probably going to be working between about 1.5 and 3 minutes. If you don't really know how to specifically put these in play, that 1.5 to 3 minutes is usually a good guideline. If you're doing something like less than 5 reps, maybe you might need 3 or 4 minutes, or maybe even a little bit longer. Um, and the when we look at the research surrounding this type of stuff, the reason that you want to wait until your muscle is relatively recovered is because if you don't, you're going to be going into subsequent sets extremely fatigued. And if those subsequent sets are extremely fatigued, you're not going to be progressing as well as you need to progress. And so if we have people listening to this that are clients of ours, there's a reason that in our one-on-one clients and in our Iron Core group fitness training, we have specific rep time periods indicated. This is not necessarily a suggestion. This is a please do this. And it's listed that way because if you are cutting it shorter than what we have listed there, you're probably selling yourself short. Can you cut it shorter? The only time that I would recommend cutting that shorter is if for some reason you're really pressed for time, but I would recommend lowering the sets first to
Yep.
hit that before lowering time on your
Agreed.
sets.
I'd rather you take the rest and just drop the number of sets that you're doing and have those sets be super hard as they're intended to be versus shortening your rest and not really, and that kind of turns into junk volume, I think.
I agree. I mean, and that's why we have that recommendation in place as it is. And
Yeah.
for other people that have heard from different coaches about different potential benefits to these really short rest periods. The only time there are real benefits to these really short rest periods is if you're doing a sport that has really short rest periods like this for whatever reason. And so if you've got a sport that does that, then you train for what the sport is. So if you're doing CrossFit and they're like, okay, well, you get like a 10-second rest between these things, and you know that you've got something coming up like that, yeah, train like that. But a lot of people attempt to do this because they've heard that like interval training will burn more calories or do something like that or aid in fat loss. And it doesn't really. Even for like an entire workout where you're just shortening your rest periods, assuming the volume is the same, it adds like 40 extra calories burned. So it's nothing. And so people think, okay, well, if I just lift faster, it's cardio. It doesn't end up working out that way. So
Yeah.
for those people that are doing these really short rest periods because they like to feel really sore, they like to feel gassed, they like to feel, that excessive level of effort, that's what it is. You are increasing the fatigue and level of effort for less progress. And people kind of have a hard time wrapping their heads around the fact that you could be working harder and doing less from a progress perspective, but that's exactly what's happening. And so we have research that looks at this, and that 2 or 3 minute period for most physique style training tends to hold true when they compare it to, the same, like a three sets of 10 reps, and they compare it to 1 minute. The group that does the 2 to 3 minutes tends to progress better. So there's a reason that we have it set up that way. And again, I actually have an article on this on rest periods on our website. So if people are interested in looking at the research surrounding it, you can certainly go there or post up in our Facebook and Mighty Network communities, and I can get you that article.
So we have it. We do have a question in the chat from Ryan about Bulgarian split squats. And he said he's having issues getting his knee to the ground. Should I lower the weight? So there are two things here. And I don't know, Ryan, I don't know how tall you are. But I find that most people put their back foot up way too high. They're putting it up on like a 20 or a 24-inch box and they're expecting to get their knee to touch the floor. But if you were to actually measure their leg, there's no possible way that they could reach the floor with their foot being that tall. Um, so the bench you might be using might actually be too high. You don't have to touch your knee to the floor either. In our Iron Core programming, we do either a glute biased or a quad biased Bulgarian. So depending on which one you're doing, we're looking at the shin angle, right? So a quad biased, you'd have more knees over toes. A glute biased, you're going to have a more vertical shin. So as long as you are adhering to that, I wouldn't really worry too much about your knee touching the floor. If it's a balance issue, you can potentially put like an ab mat or stack a couple of plates up underneath the knee that's dropping to the floor and use that to kind of rest it on the floor at the very bottom. But I wouldn't worry so much if you're unable to touch that knee to the ground. That's not necessarily a prerequisite for that movement being completed correctly.
There also could be benefits from adjusting how you have your back foot.
Yeah.
So a lot of people will try to balance themselves on the ball of their toe. I would not
Mhm.
recommend putting, or the ball of their foot, sorry.
Yep.
I would not recommend putting the ball of your foot as your stability anchor on that back foot. I would put my entire
The
top of
top of
my
your
foot
foot.
down flat
Hmm.
on whatever it is, and that'll allow you to get a little bit deeper anyways. But like Beth was saying, knee to the ground is not that's not a thing. Like it's not like you have to touch your knee to the ground for it to be a good movement. So that's not a movement mechanic that we're teaching. I hope that we're not teaching that. Like if
No.
it's in the video for some reason, it shouldn't be in there.
I
But
don't know if it is or isn't. I'll check on that. But yeah, that's not a requirement for the movement at all.
I mean, I've done demo videos on Bulgarian, so I hope we're using that because I don't say that.
So now we're not using that particular one because the in our programming we're doing either a quad
Ah,
biased
okay. I see
or
it.
a glute
Yeah.
biased.
Okay. Yeah, touching the knee is not necessary to do that. I focus more on am I able to go through again, this is kind of like that squat thing that we were just talking about, where it's like go as deep as you can while still biasing the muscle that your mobility allows. And so what I do is I see what my front foot is doing. Like, is my front foot able to get to where I want it to be?
Mhm.
Can I go to the end range of motion of my front foot? My back foot really has nothing to do with anything. My back knee has
Yeah.
nothing to do with anything. Like I'm not paying attention to that at all. I'm focusing on where my front leg is going.
Yeah.
And so as long as your front leg is going to end ranges of motion within your mobility, then that's what you want to focus on, not that back knee. Okay. But I don't know if you have that upper the top side of your back foot as the stability anchor. Um, if you don't, post up in Money Networks because I actually have a video showing that how to do that. And so because I found for me when I finally switched that up, and this was one of those things that I just kind of figured out over the years when I was training, just makes Bulgarian split squats a hell of a lot more stable. Makes it a lot more fun to do.
And comfortable. I've tried the ball of the foot before and it like
It's not
it's
comfortable at
really
all.
uncomfortable. Like
Uh-uh.
it pulls on my quad and I have turf toe from years of sports, so like it always pisses off my toes. It's just I never have found it to be a comfortable position, but I know some people really dig it, but to your point, that does elevate you even a little bit more.
Yeah,
So
so your knee's almost never going to touch if
yeah,
you're up on the ball of your foot. So,
yeah.
all right. How long do the newbie gains last? So newbie gains, it's really dependent on how consistent and adherent you are with training. I mean, if you're just kind of like coming in and working out for a month and then like you disappear for 2 years and then you come back another month, you essentially never leave the newbie gain stage because you never started. So newbie gains tend to last about a year of consistent training, maybe a little bit longer in certain people. Um, there's no formal, excuse me, there's no formal definition of what newbie gains are. I mean, it's just this vague description of the beginning time of training where you have accelerated growth because your body's not used to any kind of growth stimulus. And so, um, I have an impractical um, set that essentially I just came up with when people ask like what is a beginner trainee, what's an intermediate trainee, what's an advanced trainee. The way that I explain it, and this is not backed by anything science related, I literally came up with this myself. So I want to really put that out there. This is not backed by anything. I consider beginners people who have the ability to raise weights on lifts nearly every week. I feel intermediates are people that can take anywhere from a few weeks to a month to start raising weights in lifts. And that's not saying like if you do a 3 by 10, you start out with 100 pounds and then you do a 3 by 10 at 110. No, if you can go up to like 105 on just one of those sets, that's still increasing. Advanced trainees take multiple months to raise weight, raise load on a lift. And so if you can look at your training logs and you can see, okay, well, I'm regularly every week or two going up in weights on things, well, you're probably closer to the beginner stage. If it's taking you a month to raise weights, okay, well, you could be in the intermediate stage. If it's taking you 3, 4 months to raise weights, okay, well, you're probably more advanced. And that's typically how it is outside of like injury type situations or nagging problem type situations. So if you're healthy, you're eating well, and this is also assuming you're not in a really deep cut. I mean, this is, that can certainly impact progress as well. But, the newbie gain stage usually lasts about a year, maybe 16, 18 months if you're lucky. And then you're pretty much an intermediate if you've been training consistently during that time period. Okay. I breathe hard during workouts, but I don't sweat much. What determines the sweat factor? Okay, breathing hard means you need more oxygen. Sweating means you're hot. And so, how hot you are is going to determine how much you sweat. And this is another one of those weird things that when people first start working out, they always wonder, well, if I'm not like, drenched in sweat, am I not working hard? I mean, no, not necessarily. I mean, you get drenched in sweat sitting doing absolutely nothing at the beach. Your body is literally just trying to cool itself. You could go for a 2 mile run in Alaska and you may not sweat at all. So this is a thermoregulation thing. This is not a sign of how hard you are working. And so it's a different thing. And once you start to realize a little bit of that, you can kind of move away from the, okay, well, I need to be sweating really hardcore or I don't feel like I'm doing anything. And this is, again, another one of those things where it kind of ties into the, okay, well, people have these super short rest periods and they're really trying to make themselves feel like they're working really hard. And there's nuance to programming and to training correctly. And so this is what we take care of when we are programming for people is that we are making sure that people are focusing on the nuance that's important and not on the nuance that is, or not on the stuff that's not important. And the stuff that's not important is, you know, trying to just make yourself sweat or just trying to make yourself sore for no actual reason. We want you to push really hard with intensity into that one RIR where we're telling you to do it, but we don't want you to do it with inadequate rest. We don't want you to do it, with an excessive amount of volume just to get there. We want you to actually focus on efficient, viable reps and not junk volume. And so we say junk volume a lot, but we talk about junk volume a lot because most programming in the way that people have done it traditionally has a lot of junk volume. I mean, if you look at any of the programs from like ChatGPT's programs are based on old Muscle and Strength magazines. They did a study on it and they found that when ChatGPT, when you ask them for a program, it kicks out a Muscle and Strength magazine because it apparently is one of the highest viewed things on the internet. And so it finds the most viewed. It doesn't find the best. And so, um, this old style of training was from like the 80s and 90s on guys on literally all the steroids because that's who used to write for these magazines. And they don't work very well for a natural athlete. And yet, this is the stuff that everybody's doing because this is what they read in Muscle and Fitness back when they were growing up. And certainly I did too. This is the stuff that I had read about, and we just didn't know any better because we didn't have the internet and we didn't have the ability to talk this out with people. And if you talk to the biggest guy in the gym and he's on like 3 grams of gear every week, you don't know the difference between the way that he should train and the way that you should train. And this is why we're seeing people train 6 days a week. This is why we're seeing people train with this exorbitant amount of volume. And it's also why people struggle so much and why there's so many nagging injuries. So we're moving people away from that because there are better ways to do this and more efficient ways to do this. And you can spend your time doing better things like meal prepping, which people aren't spending the time to do. So make your life easier, do less, and progress more. Okay. Um, if I'm following a calorie deficit plan, should I be hungry after hitting my macros? Maybe. If you're in a calorie deficit, the whole idea that you could be hungry really makes a lot of sense because it's your body trying to prevent you from losing weight. I mean, think about it this way. Your body doesn't know that you're not a caveman. And so when you're not eating, it thinks, okay, we're starting to starve and I need to ramp up my hunger because I need to get this person to go and get some calories and I need to lower the amount that they move because I need to prevent weight loss. And so it's essentially your body throwing a little bit of a fit. And so, you've got two main options to deal with this. And, you're not going to look at this like hey, I'm just, going to ignore this if I'm feeling hunger, or I'm going to somehow try to fix this completely because it's unnecessary. Well, sometimes it is necessary. But the two ways that you handle this outside of telling yourself, yeah, hunger is normal, is to adjust the type of foods that you eat and the timing of the foods when you eat them. And so if you're finding, there's one part of the day that people have typically increased hunger signals, and this is going to be genetically mediated and based off of your habits and your routines, start to put more food towards there. For me, I can ignore eating until like 10 or 11 a.m. and I'm completely fine. For most people, eating in the morning is more important. So set your food up around where you want to eat the most for to fight hunger, and enjoy it then. And then on top of that, choose higher volume, lower calorie foods. This is the biggest issue that everybody runs into whenever they're getting to a fat loss phase. They still want to eat like they did when they were much higher in body weight. You cannot eat like you did before and expect to change. And so things need to change. And that means maybe you're not getting chicken thighs anymore. Maybe you're getting chicken breast. Maybe you're getting white fish. Maybe you're getting deli turkey, deli ham. Maybe you're getting pork tenderloin instead of pork chop. But these adjustments will allow you to have, one, a lot more protein in that diet, which is going to be a benefit in most cases when you're in a calorie deficit. And two, it's going to help be much more satiating because if you're trying to raw dog it off of, chicken thighs, for most people, that's going to be unsustainable because the portion size is just a lot smaller because there's a lot more calories in, 1 gram of that food compared to 1 gram of a much leaner cut. So you've got to be conscious of that and then make those adjustments um, based on how you're feeling there. I'm starting to run 5 and 10K. Will that interfere with muscle building, especially in the legs? It depends on how much you're doing it. If you're doing this occasionally, it's not going to interfere. Running 10K consistently multiple times per week will probably interfere with progress in building legs. I mean, there's a reason that you don't see runners with these, massively thick legs. It's a little bit of a catabolic signal. It's going to blunt that anabolic signaling. So, you make that trade-off. Do you want to get better at running? Do you want to have bigger legs? You're going to have to make a choice for you. That doesn't mean that you need to cut out running entirely, but maybe you're not running 10Ks multiple times per week. I've heard you mention that essential amino acids are trash in the context of early morning training. Can you give a little bit more information about that? Okay. So early morning training, fasted training is completely fine for both men and women of all ages. There's nothing wrong with it if that's the way that you like to train. Train like that just fine. If you are training like that, it probably makes more sense to get a protein serving relatively soon after your training session so you get some amino acids in your system. An EAA supplement prior to this will not really provide you with any benefit that you think that it's going to be providing you with. Assuming you're eating relatively soon afterwards, assuming that you're not taking multiple days of fasting prior to leading up to this is just a fast of, waking up from sleep. You do have fuel in your system. You're not starving to death. And so you're not really going to appreciably lose any lean muscle mass. The one caveat to this, and this is always the one thing that kind of makes this a little bit of an interesting talk, is technically, if you look at research that looks at fasted or fed training seems to be better for most people for strength progress. And it's not that you have to have carbs or that you have to have protein. It's that you just have to have something. It's the satiating effect of food that seems to make a difference. And so when they match calories and macros, you can literally shift anything up no matter how you want, as long as it's a more satiating meal. So people always talk about the fact that, oh, you need to have EAAs, which is, a liquid powder in a liquid, or, oh, you need to have like Gatorade or something like that. Again, it's in a liquid, so it's not very satiating. If you compare that to something like an apple or a peanut butter sandwich or whatever it is, that seems to work better, the peanut butter sandwich or the apple, because of a higher satiation. So the practical recommendation here is If you are training and you hate eating beforehand, don't eat. It's completely fine. You should train based on what is your preference. If you don't have a preference, eat. That's the answer. Don't worry about things um, like EAAs because these supplements, they don't work better than either actual food or just a whey protein shake. Even if you equate the amino acid matrix between an EAA and a whey protein shake, the whey protein shakes provide more benefits. You get better progress with the whey protein shakes. There's something about the structure of protein, the quaternary structure of the protein, that provides a better anabolic benefit. And a slower digestion is actually a good thing as far as muscle protein synthesis goes. It's not how high you can spike it at once. It's essentially how long you can keep it elevated. And whole intact proteins do this better than things like free-form amino acids. And so people were always sold, for the past 20 years of, oh, it'll get into your system faster without realizing that that's a negative. That's not a good thing. The only time that that would be a good thing is if you're actually starving and you need to get stuff in you, but you're not starving from just going to bed and waking up and going to the gym. That's not starvation. So, in the context of people working out, it doesn't really make any sense to take EAAs. There's only a couple times where EAAs would make sense. Um, something like endurance training, like a triathlon or something like that. But the carbs make more sense than that. But if you want to throw EAAs on top of that, that's perfectly fine. Middle of the day in a CrossFit competition or a strongman competition, and for some reason you can't get a protein shake or you just don't want to because it makes your stomach upset, EAAs could work in combination with carbs. Outside of stuff like that, don't waste your money on this stuff. I mean, there's a reason that I don't push this or really put it into any of our supplement recommendation things, and I could certainly link up with a company and make money off of an EAA supplement if I really wanted to, but I don't because it's not worth it for you guys. And so I'm not going to push something that's not going to benefit you. Do I take anything for gut health or to aid in digestion? I don't because not not that probiotics couldn't have benefits. They could. The problem is we don't know what probiotic strain at what dose for what person under what conditions. We don't know. And so there are tons of studies that show benefits. There's far less studies that show benefits in healthy people. There are far more studies that show benefits in people under certain conditions. So if you have like antibiotics and you've been on an antibiotic regimen, taking in probiotic makes a lot of sense. Um, if you've had other issues with like a C. diff infection and they've cleared that out and now you're trying to repopulate, then it makes sense. For a general person, taking these things, we just aren't there yet. Probably in our lifetime, we'll be able to get, I think that with the advent of AI and the ability to kind of like map these things a little bit easier, I think that we'll eventually get to it. We're just not there. As far as other things like that, like digestive enzymes. Typically, digestive enzymes aren't shown to do anything in otherwise healthy people unless you have an issue. So for lactose intolerant people, lactase might make sense. But for a normal person that has proper ability to produce things like lactase, in which case you would not be lactose intolerant to begin with, it doesn't seem to do a whole lot. So most of these things are pretty much just wasting your money. People will try these types of things and they'll say, "Oh, I feel a lot better when I started doing that," but most of the time it's probably just placebo. It's not really replicated in the research when we look at this type of stuff. And so recommending it is something that's very difficult for me because I can't tell you, you need to take this strain of probiotics or this grouping um, of enzymes is going to be beneficial for you. We have no idea. And so chances are you're probably just taking some junk on top of the fact that probiotic supplements, you will typically to have the best response need a live culture, and most of them aren't live cultures. And so you're probably just taking something that's not doing anything. Do you think that you should reserve carbs to only training days? Is that worthwhile? No, I don't. And again, when you have proper weight training set up, your skeletal muscle glycogen reserves are not a problem unless you're doing ultra high volume training, like those 1990s bodybuilder programs that we talked about that the natural lifter probably shouldn't be doing anyways. You're not burning through your skeletal muscle glycogen reserves even after a day of just kind of sitting around. I mean, skeletal muscle glycogen only drains when you're using that muscle. And an overnight fast is not going to do that. It takes about 72 hours to lose about 20% of that skeletal muscle reserve. So Is there a reason to reserve carbs for the training days? No, because over the time that you are going in between the days, that'll help replenish the carbs. On top of that, carbs actually do have a bit of an anabolic stimulus, and you are recovering on those days that you're not training. And so having the ability to be fully fueled on those off days is a very important thing. And I've seen questions multiple times during these Q&A sessions where people ask, "Hey, should I have less calories on days that I don't train?" And the answer is the same thing there is no, you should have the same amount if possible, because the anabolic stimulus lasts about 36 hours. So if you train the day before, the day after, you're still using that training to build muscle and recover. And so you need fuel. So this idea of we only need fuel on the day that we train is kind of ludicrous if you think about how the body works. And so the answer is it probably makes the most sense for most people to spread out their nutrition evenly every day. It makes things simpler. And it's something your body probably needs. So I wouldn't try to micromanage these things or really outthink them. The only time that I would really start to make adjustments for how I do things like carbs is if I'm getting down to something like contest prep levels of calories. And in that case, I might put carbs around the workout, particularly before, because you're likely having problems replenishing skeletal muscle glycogen reserves otherwise. But even in a regular cut for most people, it's not to that extent. So this is a very different thing. This is when men are getting to like 3 and 4% body fat. This is when women are getting down into like the low teens. This is not you, and that's not to be cruel or anything, but that's to say these are extremes, like huge
Yeah.
extremes. And so
Yeah.
you might have heard this from like a bodybuilder and saying, "Oh, I do this," and and they look great, but they also are doing some other kind of insane things that it's not relevant to you, and so that's where this falls into play. Do you ever carb load before an intense workout? Same answer. No, because you don't need to. Not for maximal strength, not for physique training. If you're doing something like endurance work, carb loading can work. So if you have something like a CrossFit competition or you've got something like a soccer match tomorrow, carb loading is a good idea. But otherwise, no, it's not going to really benefit. And I know that this really blows people's minds because bodybuilders and powerlifters love eating gummy bears at all times, but they're just doing it because they love to eat gummy bears. They're not doing it for a benefit. Do you still need vegetables if you already eat plenty of fruit and fiber? I would recommend it because there's a different spectrum of nutrients in vegetables than there are in fruits. And so there's no reason to be this restrictive about foods. Have a variety of different foods. It's going to close up any gaps in nutrition that you may have. Um, and it's something that I think most people try to micromanage a little bit too much. And I don't know why this has caught on so much in the past couple of years, but I think that people suspect that we know a lot more about nutrition than we really do. And there are huge gaps in knowledge for people and nutrition. And so when in doubt, have a variety of these different things of these foods that we know. If you just look at all the data surrounding fruits and veggies, I mean, increasing the amounts that you intake increases overall health, increases lifespan, increases longevity, and it's going to help with satiation. So take advantage of it. I would never cut any of these things out. If you are just starting on a fitness lifestyle and you're like, you know what, I haven't been eating any fruits and vegetables for a long time, and eating fruit is the only thing that I'm willing to do right now. Okay, knock yourself out, eat fruit. But have the thought in the back of your mind, okay, I'm probably going to start to incorporate some of these other things over time as your palate changes and as you become a little bit more comfortable with eating this way.
Well, and veggies are more, it's more than just about the fiber. I mean, so
Yeah.
you mentioned micronutrients and like that's a huge part of it. And there are micronutrients and vitamins and minerals that are in vegetables that you're not going to get in fruit. So I also don't want people to get hung up on just thinking about fiber. While I love that because that's hardly anything that most people think about, you don't eat fruits and vegetables just for their fiber content. You're eating them for their micronutrient content, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of benefits to these types of things. And again, this is one of the reasons that I was saying we don't really know everything about this stuff.
Yeah.
And so, people saying, "Oh, well, I heard from this guy that this is all I need." I mean, he doesn't know. I don't know. And so the answer when we don't know is go with what's safe, and what's safe is
Eat
having a
all of it.
variety of these. Yeah, having a
All of
variety of these things.
it.
Okay.
Eat your
Um,
vegetables.
yeah, you don't need to hate on the vegetables. It's fine. All right. Does a female cycle affect their strength and endurance? No, no, it doesn't. We've talked about this before, so I don't want to really belabor the point. I do want to point out that the people that suggest that it does are not in line with any evidence. There's no evidence that suggests this. The evidence that suggests this is in mice and not human women. And so, no, it's fine. Now, there are going to be days, and we've talked about this before too. There are going to be days, men, just like women, if you've had like bad sleep or super stress or anything like that, and it could be a consequence of your cycle, um, then adjust for that. But don't adjust just because it's your cycle. Adjust based on what you're experiencing, and you'll be fine. When I have the flu or a cold with a chest cough, should I weightlift? I would certainly not weightlift in public. I would tell you probably to just chill out. If the general rule for this type of thing is if the cold is located above your neck, you can go and you can work out. If the cold is neck or below, you should probably not work out. And that just tends to come from the differences in viruses and how they affect people. And if there's something that's like bronchial or there's something that you could spread through the air, it's probably a lot safer to just stay at home and do what you need to do. Make
The
sure that
gym is
you're
always going to be there.
it
Like,
will, and having
no.
4 or 5 days off for sickness is not going to kill you.
Yeah.
Take that time and take control of your nutrition as best you can. And I'm assuming that in this case you're not throwing up because that should be pretty obvious. Don't go in, so you should still be able to take control of your nutrition and get some good out of that situation. Is training for hypertrophy the same as working for strength in terms of sets, reps, and how to achieve both? No, it's not. Not at all. Strength and hypertrophy training are distinct elements. When I program for myself and when we program for things like our Iron Core group fitness training, we actually do power building, which is a combination of the two. And that's because most people can benefit from improving their physique and improving their strength. I mean, improving your strength is one of those big things for lowering injury risk, increasing longevity, increasing your ability to do things in everyday life. Like if you want to be able to pick up your kid or pick up your bike and carry it someplace or, whatever, you better be doing some strength work as well. And so we do power building, but there are distinct ways to program for one or the other. And it tends to come down to the ratio of time that you spend at higher weight, lower rep for things like strength training. And so strength training, you're going to have far less volume than even we have in a power building program or a hypertrophy program. I mean, you're not doing more than 15 sets an entire day. If you're doing more than 15 sets an entire day, you probably have strength programming set up wrong. And so, you're only going to be able to work out in a true strength program 3 or 4 days a week. Um, Anything more is going to really beat you down. With hypertrophy programming, you're going to want to stick to about 10 sets or less per muscle group in a training session. If you're doing significantly more than 10 sets in a training session for a single muscle group, you're probably doing too much. Now, that's not to say that we don't ever program a little bit over that because sometimes we do. But there's a reason that like you're not getting like 12 sets of chest and 12 sets of arms and 12 sets of shoulders in a single day because it's just too much. It's too fatiguing and then it becomes junk volume. And so there's different ways to set these things up. Um, so if you want to focus on one specifically, then you train specifically for that one. And usually the people that are doing that are the people that are either competing in bodybuilding or competing in powerlifting, and then you program for whatever you're doing. How do you do it with Olympic weightlifting, Beth?
Um,
Because
it's
a power sport's even different than that.
It's a little bit different. I mean, we do like the volume is high, but it's not true strength work. Like our true strength work with front squats and back squats is set up a little bit differently than, just doing snatches for the day or clean and jerks or something like that, because that's more technique involvement. So the more often you do something, the better you get at it. So it's usually high volume in that sense, because you do need more exposure to the stimulus in order to get better at it. And then obviously when you get better at it and you can lift more weight more efficiently, it's very low rep though. So we don't do like I never did anything over 5 reps ever on anything for weightlifting. So even though I had a lot of sets, like I had 7, 8, 9, 10 sets sometimes, the reps were always really, really low. And when I had my 10 set days, my reps were like 1 or 2. So it's only 10 to 20 reps total. So the sets are high, but the number of reps that we do is pretty low.
Yeah, and I've programmed like that for powerlifting too. I mean, I'll program an 8x3
Hmm.
quite often in
You get
powerlifting.
lots of rest in between.
Yeah, I mean it's like 4 or 5 minutes of rest in between, so
Yeah,
that takes forever.
yeah,
But like,
yeah,
if you're doing an 8x3 and I said that 15 sets is like the most that you'll do for a day, it's like half your day in just that
yeah,
one movement.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Because I think
So,
I
but
had
it takes a long time.
I would have like 3 exercises a day, and that was
Yeah.
it. Like some variation of snatch, a squat pattern, and then like a heavy, some sort of heavy press, and that would be it for the day.
Yeah, and it's really funny when you give this to somebody who's kind of like new to training and they're like, I'm not doing enough. And you're like, yes, you are. And they're
Trust
like,
me, you
I'm
are.
only doing 3 exercises. It's like you're doing enough. And if like,
And
I mean,
you're in the gym for like 2 hours
yeah,
doing
and like,
cardio.
the professional guys that like set world records are only doing 3 exercises in a
Yeah,
day. And you think that it's not enough for you. And it's really funny to get because again, they're used to seeing the programs from Muscle and Fitness, Muscle and Strength,
yeah,
Chat GPT, all these like super nonsense programs that are based on that old style bodybuilding routine in the guys on as much HGH as possible so they can recover from certain things. And they're all also on like insulin and stuff like that. So they're taking advantage of carbs in a way that you can't take advantage of carbs. And this is the one time where it actually does make sense to have like gummy bears in the middle of your training. If you're on exogenous
yeah,
insulin,
yeah,
it can make sense.
yeah.
I'm hoping that the people that are listening to this aren't on exogenous insulin because it's really dangerous. Um, so I hope that you're not, assuming you're not diabetic, obviously, but it's one of those things that like you can make arguments of things like, okay, well, testosterone, you can take it in a way that's not really that dangerous. And insulin is one of those things that you don't really fuck around with because it can really cause some problems real quick, really quickly if you don't watch it.
Who needs
So
a pancreas?
yeah, I mean it's not great. This is kind of a good question based off of one of the ones that we had earlier, and I'm sure that you'll have some input for this one, Beth. Can you run and still build muscle, or is the hybrid thing BS? The hybrid thing is not BS. You can certainly run and still build muscle just fine. There are lots of people that do. There are lots of impressive people that do. If you couldn't do this, NFL players would all be small, but they're big. And certainly there might be steroids involved in that too. But hybrid training is something that really does work. The thing when the person was asking about 10Ks is that if you're running 10K multiple times per week,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
too much.
That's too much.
That's not true hybrid training. That's just kind
Yeah,
of being nuts.
that's training for a 10K.
Yeah. And so can you be a hybrid trainee? Yes, you can. Can you do too much? Yes, you can also do too much. And so it is possible, but you're going to need to set things up appropriately. And that might mean dialing back some of these major distance runs. That may mean adding in some HIIT work as part of your training throughout the week. That may mean some middle distance. May mean some short distance. And when you start to do that, you can train for this. But are you going to see somebody that's like both an ultra marathoner long term, not just like I'm going to train for an ultra marathon once and and say that I'm a hybrid athlete? Um, are you going to find some guy that trains for an ultra marathon over the years and is also 240 pounds?
And can
Probably,
deadlift like
and can deadlift
700 pounds.
600 pounds. Yeah,
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
not. So you'll see these examples of guys that they're like, oh, I'm a hybrid trainee and I did a marathon. And it's like, cool, but you did one. And it's not that you were building massive amounts of muscle over that time that you were training for it. It's that you were preventing as much loss as possible.
Correct.
And so it's possible for these guys to do that. Should you do it as a trainee and say, okay, well, I can do everything? No, you shouldn't because you can't. So that's just the way that it is. So you make those
Yeah,
adjustments based off of what your preference or priority is.
There's been a lot of chatter in the hybrid space too about, the interference effect and what it means and who it applies to. And the general consensus among the people that I follow in the space who do research in this space, the interference effect really for mere humans, mere mortals like you and I, we are likely not training hard enough and long enough for the interference effect to be problematic. Meaning, if you're running, like I ran 6 miles this morning, I ran 5 miles on Monday morning, but that's it. That's my running for the whole week. And I don't lift on my running days. So on the days that I'm not running, I'm either resting or if I'm lifting, it's heavy, but it's moderate-ish volume. It's not high volume. So I'm not going to experience the interference effect because of the way that my training is set up and my overall mileage is not super duper high. For the people who start to drift into the half marathon, marathon, like doing multiple of those while strength training, if you actually sit down and look at their programming, most of those folks are only lifting,
Two
like
days a week.
truly lifting heavy weights, two, maybe three times a week at the most. So most people that are doing this that call themselves hybrid athletes, I wouldn't even consider myself a hybrid athlete because my mileage is pretty low. And again, this is going to depend on what your ultimate goals are. So the reason that I do this is because I wanted to get more cardiovascularly fit and focus on my lifting. I wanted to intentionally kind of step back a little bit from my lifting. But I have not lost any strength. And some lifts of mine, like my strict press and my bench press, I've actually PR'd recently. So a lot of my lifts have actually gone up. And it's because the interference effect really it's overblown when it comes to this whole hybrid athlete concept. None of us are really like out here running marathons and deadlifting 600 pounds. That's not how this is working.
Well, do you remember I actually wrote an article for SciFit on the
I do.
interference effect and all of
Yeah.
the data on. So I'm intimately familiar with
Yeah.
this research, and yeah, I mean, almost nobody's doing enough to cause an
Yeah.
interference effect. But when a person comes and they say I'm going to be doing a 10K, that kind of throws up a little bit of a red
Yeah.
flag for me
I
because
mean, and
I don't know
especially if
what
you're
they're.
doing that, like that's, over 6 miles. And if you're
Yeah,
doing that multiple times a week, I mean, especially your legs, like that is going
yeah,
to, because your legs are just going to be tired, right? Like on the
yeah.
days that I run 6 to 8 miles, my legs
Beat to
are
shit for like a
trash.
day afterwards
They're
too.
trash. Like I
Yeah.
can't do anything. So, the longer distances, that's when you really have to start setting up your training in an intelligent manner, but you can still very much do that.
Significantly above like 2 or 3 miles, I would start to question my frequency then.
Yep. Yep.
So I don't really like even for me, I run like 2 miles and I don't think about it. Um, I- but if you're significantly above 2 or 3 miles, I would start to think, okay, well, how often am I doing this? Where am I
Exactly.
placing this in
Exactly.
regards to where my leg days are?
Mhm.
Um, and then I would try to position them as far away from those as possible
Yep.
if I could.
Yep. That's
Okay.
exactly how you do it. Because
Yeah.
you're not gonna be able to do anything on trash legs. You just can't. Like the effort that you're able to give, like if you're really trying to adhere to that 1 to 2 RIR, there's no way.
Yeah. And
There's no.
I would be very careful about that. Can I consume my protein before working out and not after the workout? Yes, you can. This question typically comes because of the old uh, anabolic window idea that you have to eat protein within 30 minutes of working out or it goes to waste. The real answer is that we probably have a 6 or so hour window around the workout. And so if you eat before, that is fuel, an amino acid pool that can be used even after the workout. You're not burning through amino acids typically to fuel your workout anyways. So you're going to be using that muscle glycogen and then any available carbs in your system. And so, so you can certainly eat before if that's what you prefer. And then you probably have multiple hours afterwards that you don't need to eat and you would still progress optimally. You'd still progress just fine. So the good news about this is I can say this and then people can feel a little bit more comfortable in setting up their nutrition in a way that they find fits into their life a little bit better. Is salmon every day healthy? Yeah. Why wouldn't it be? It's not,
I hope so,
I'm
because I eat it
assuming,
every day.
yeah, I'm assuming Beth would be dead. I'm assuming that this is question about mercury, but salmon doesn't really have that much mercury in it, so it's not really a problem.
Sable would be dead too.
Yeah. So the other thing that people kind of think about is like, what about like, and this is funny. This I'm going to bring up something that's going to make everybody kind of uncomfortable. So people talk about like farm raised versus wild caught salmon and how, okay, well, I don't want to eat farm raised because whatever fucking reason. It's always like straight nonsense of why you don't want to eat farm raised.
Yeah.
But when you look at things like PCBs, when you look at things like contaminants and toxins, I'm not overly worried about any source that you get, but they're higher in wild because the oceans are filled with trash. When you have a pen with these animals in them, it's clean water. And so it's funny because these wild ones are actually coming in with like higher PCB levels, higher plastics, higher higher toxin amounts. But everybody's like you can't eat the farm raised because very slightly less omega-3. I mean, it's still a lot of omega-3. And then they're like, well, they do colorants to make them that right color because otherwise they're just like pale. And it's like, yeah, they do, but the wild caught has its pink color because it eats astaxanthin in the wild. In a farm, they give them astaxanthin by hand. That's what that colorant is. It's literally the same thing. They just drop it in instead of the salmon finding it. So it's not like they're choosing like, hey, let's get pink paint and dump that in. No, they're using astaxanthin. And so it's the same stuff. And so there's this like huge weird push because of the appeals to nature fallacy that we have to get these like wild caught things because somehow they're a lot healthier for us when the practicality is they're probably the same thing. But if you want to get technical, the wild caught one has more shit in it. So it's just
Really.
it's really funny when these people make these arguments, and it's like you've not looked into this at all. So okay, salmon, it won't kill you. What gets lost? This is a good question and one with a little bit of nuance to it. What gets lost if you eat meals less than 2 hours apart? A little bit of background for the people that are listening to this, because this is an interesting question. They tell you to spread out protein containing meals every 2 to 3 hours because you can maximize the muscle protein response and it lasts for that long. And if you eat protein again within that, you get a bit of a refractory response. And so what that means is if it's going to raise it to 100% in that first feeding, if you eat shorter in that time period, it's only going to raise it to like 80%. It's not going to raise it to like the full 100%. And so people start to think, okay, well, then I can't eat within 2 or 3 hours because I'm going to impair that muscle protein synthesis response. The food that you eat is digested differently because of a couple things. The ileal brake, which is part of your biology, the food composition that comes with the foods, and so if you have fiber, fats, carbs in there with the proteins, it's going to slow the digestion of that protein anyways. And so if we're getting really technical on paper and we want to maximize our anabolic ability, having 3 or 4 meals per day spread evenly out over the day with, uh, you know, 25 grams of protein per serving or more probably makes sense. But even doing that, that's only 100 grams of protein. If we're assuming 4 feedings, and even 3 probably works. So that means that for most people, you've got a significant amount of protein still left to get in the day that doesn't fit within that scheme. And because of the fact that protein doesn't get ingested and completely metabolized and out of your system within 2 hours in a normal feeding, unless you're doing something like just having a hydrolysate whey and nothing else in your diet, um, the digestion speed, the ileal brake, all those things kind of slow that speed of digestion, which is technically a good thing. And so your body's going to be filtering in this amino acid pool throughout the day. And so this 2 to 3 hour window in real life becomes really kind of murky. And so it's not really something to worry about because you're constantly, assuming you're having multiple meals per day and you're not doing OMAD, 1 meal a day, you're going to be having this constant trickle of amino acids in anyway. So like, are you really ever going to be able to get it to 100%? Maybe. Is it going to be slightly blunted? Yeah, probably. Is the fact that it's still elevated pretty significantly for longer periods of time the most important thing? Yes. And that's why when we look at the research that goes around these types of things, we don't see major differences in progress by just rote sticking to 2 to 3 hours. The total amount throughout the day means far more, and that's because of how all of this works. And so this is one of those things that I think that people really get lost in the weeds on because they see these studies, and these studies are a little bit without nuance because a lot of times they're just looking at whey protein, and they're just looking at whey protein ingested with nothing else, so it doesn't slow down the digestion. And so they're seeing these peaks and these valleys, and they're saying, oh, well, you have to do this and you have to do this. And yeah, protein timing probably makes a little bit of a difference. But it's probably not worth worrying about, assuming that you're eating a breakfast, lunch, and a dinner, and it's spread apart. And so, as long as those things are spread apart, you've got more feedings that you're probably going to need to get in the rest of your protein. Just take it however you want. Because if you take it however you want, it's all going to work out in the end, anyways. And so, those total numbers mean far more than anything else. And as long as you're focusing on that, you're going to be doing what you need to do. All right. That's actually a good place to end it because that is the end of the slides that I have. I've got a whole bunch of other slides, but we'd be stuck in the middle of one finishing up. So thank you for everybody that has paid attention and joined us today. If you have any questions, certainly drop them in Mighty Networks, in our Facebook group, or send me a DM in Instagram, and we will see you next week. Thanks, guys.